Eli Mwansa was only 12 years old when he first heard the cry that would change his life. It was early morning in the lower Zambezi region of Zambia, and the rising sun had barely warmed the dew-laced grass. The air was still and soft, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the distant call of a fish eagle. Eli had grown up in this wilderness. His father, Kafumba, was a respected wildlife ranger who had spent more than 2 decades protecting the animals of the region from poachers. Eli often followed him through the forests and along the riverbanks, learning the ways of the wild by watching and listening. That morning, Eli had wandered a little farther than usual. He carried with him a small, handmade wooden flute, something he loved to play while walking through the bush. The sounds of the flute often mimicked the calls of birds, something Eli had mastered over time. As he stepped through the tall grass, humming a tune in his head, he suddenly froze. There it was again. A sharp, high-pitched trumpet, but faint, almost like a whimper. Not a bird. Not a car. It was an elephant calf. He was sure of it. Eli's heart started pounding. He had heard elephants before, of course, but this was different. This was a cry of fear. A cry for help. He crouched low and moved quickly through the bush, careful not to make too much noise. The sound came again, closer this time. As he reached the edge of a muddy ravine near the riverbank, he saw it. A small elephant calf, no taller than Eli's shoulders, was stuck in the mud. Its legs were trapped deep in the wet clay, and its trunk flailed helplessly in the air. It had likely been trying to follow its herd across the river and slipped. Alone and frightened, it cried out again, this time softer, as if even its strength was beginning to fade. Eli didn't hesitate. He dropped his flute and ran all the way back to his home. Breathless and panicked, he burst into the ranger station and found his father. "There's a baby elephant," he gasped. "It's stuck near the river. It's alone. It's crying." Kafumba, though startled, knew his son well enough to believe him. Within minutes, he had gathered 2 fellow rangers, some ropes, and a canvas sling. Together, they followed Eli through the undergrowth back to the ravine. When they arrived, the calf was still there, struggling but growing weaker. It took hours. The mud was thick and unyielding, and the calf was heavy. They wrapped ropes around its midsection, tied them to nearby trees, and carefully pulled. The calf squealed in fear, but eventually, with one last mighty tug, they freed it. Exhausted and trembling, the little elephant collapsed onto the dry patch of ground. Its breathing was shallow, and it didn't try to get up. "We need to get him to Ngoma," one of the rangers said. Ngoma was a wildlife rehabilitation center about 20 kilometers away. It was where injured or orphaned animals were taken to be treated and, if possible, released back into the wild. They loaded the calf into the back of a modified pickup truck, padding it with blankets and straw. Eli rode in the back, his hand resting gently on the calf's head. He looked into its eyes. Wide, wet, and terrified, Eli whispered softly to it the whole way. "You're okay now. I've got you. You're safe." When they reached Ngoma, the staff was quick to act. The veterinarian examined the calf and shook his head. "He's in bad shape. Severely dehydrated. He hasn't eaten. And there's no sign of his mother. He may not survive the night." But Eli refused to leave. He sat beside the pen where the calf had been placed, holding a bowl of special milk formula. The calf wouldn't drink. It simply lay on its side, barely moving. Eli stayed there through the night, talking, humming, sometimes whistling softly. He named the calf Temba, which in the local dialect meant hope. That's what this little creature needed more than anything else. The next morning, Temba was still alive, but no stronger. He still wouldn't drink. The vet suggested they begin preparing for the worst. But on the 3rd day, something changed. Temba nudged Eli's foot with his trunk. It was a tiny gesture, but it meant the world. Eli smiled for the first time in days. He offered the bowl again, and this time, Temba drank. Only a little, but it was a start. From that moment, the bond between them grew like wildfire. Temba began to follow Eli wherever he went. When Eli walked around the center, the calf waddled after him. He sniffed at Eli's pockets, nudged his back playfully, and wrapped his tiny trunk around Eli's wrist like a child grabbing a parent's finger. The staff at Ngoma watched in awe. They had seen elephants come and go, but never one so attached to a human, and certainly not this fast. Temba was drawn to Eli like he was family. Eli became part of the caregiving team. He helped mix milk, clean Temba's sleeping area, and even taught him simple commands. The bond was built not just on kindness, but on time, patience, and something deeper. Something unspoken. 2 years passed. Temba grew fast. He was now as tall as a jeep and twice as playful. He loved to spray water at Eli from the river and chase butterflies through the long grass. He was intelligent, mischievous, and fiercely loyal. And Eli had never loved anything more. But Temba was still an elephant. And elephants belonged in the wild. As Temba reached the age of 4, the staff at Ngoma began preparing for his release. The plan was to integrate him slowly into a nearby wild herd that had been observed passing near the reserve. They would monitor him with GPS, provide support, and let him choose his path. Eli was devastated. "He's not ready," he told his father. "He's still a baby." "He's an elephant," Kafumba replied gently. "And elephants were born to roam." In the months that followed, Eli helped Temba prepare. He showed him how to forage, led him on long walks into the deeper parts of the bush, and slowly began reducing the amount of human contact. But every evening, Temba would return to the compound, waiting by the gate until Eli came to sit with him. Then, one evening, Temba didn't come back. Eli searched the nearby trails, whistled the familiar tune on his flute, called out into the trees. Nothing. There was only silence. The next morning, the GPS tag showed Temba had joined a wild herd moving east. He was walking with them, slowly, confidently. He had made his choice. Eli sat under the baobab tree where they used to rest together. He held his flute in his hands, but didn't play. A part of him was proud, but a larger part felt like something had been torn from him. Temba was gone. Years passed. Eli grew taller. His voice deepened. He finished school, helped his father at the ranger station, and even started volunteering at Ngoma. But he never stopped thinking about Temba. Every now and then, he would ask the staff if the GPS collar still worked. For a time, it did. They tracked Temba's movements north, then west, then back near the river. But eventually, the signal stopped. The collar must have fallen off or failed. After that, there was only memory. But Eli never gave up hope. Every time he walked near the river or heard the distant trumpet of an elephant, his heart would race. Years had moved on, like the quiet current of the Zambezi River. Eli Mwansa was now 20 years old, taller, stronger, and quiet in a way that only those who had loved deeply and lost could be. He had taken his father's place at the ranger station after Kafumba retired from active field work. The forest that once felt like a playground now felt like a sacred duty. The bush held his memories. Some sweet, some aching. Eli still walked the same paths he had as a boy, and every now and then, he would pause near the ravine where Temba had once cried out. The earth had dried there now. Grass grew over the mud. Birds perched on the surrounding trees. It was peaceful, but Eli's heart always tightened when he stood there, remembering that helpless little calf and the days that followed. At Ngoma, he had earned a reputation. They called him the Whisperer, not because he had any magic, but because animals calmed around him. Orphaned baboons clung to his shoulders. Injured owls allowed him to clean their wounds. And if an elephant ever passed near, Eli would drop everything to follow it. Quietly, respectfully, with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He still played his flute. Not as often, but sometimes at sunset, when the light softened and the wind picked up, he would sit beneath the old baobab tree near the ranger station and play the tune Temba used to love. The melody was gentle, filled with notes that drifted like smoke, climbing into the sky and carrying with them a longing that words couldn't hold. Then one morning, something strange happened. A call came in from a small village just north of the Chifungwa Plain. A group of elephants had moved near their crops, not uncommon during dry season, but this time was different. The villagers reported that one of the elephants didn't raid the fields. Instead, it stood at the edge of the settlement and stared toward the forest for hours. It didn't destroy anything. It didn't eat. It just waited. Then it left. Eli was intrigued. Elephants were intelligent, yes, but rarely behaved like this. He asked for more details: size, tusks, markings. The villagers remembered large ears with a small tear on the right side and a light patch above the left eye. Eli's heart skipped. He searched the old files from Ngoma, the photos, the vet's notes. And there it was. Temba had a small notch on his right ear, just like the one the villagers described. It could have been coincidence. But Eli didn't believe in coincidence when it came to Temba. He packed a small bag and left before sunrise the next day. The journey took hours. By the time he reached the village, the elephants were long gone. But there were tracks. Eli knelt down in the dust and examined the large, round impressions on the ground. One set moved differently from the rest. Slightly hesitant, more deliberate. It was as if that elephant had lingered, uncertain. He followed the tracks. Through dense brush and over dried riverbeds, the trail weaved deep into the forest. Eli moved carefully. He had learned long ago to listen to the rustle of birds, the crunch of distant movement, the silence that falls before something important happens. At one point, he stopped near a watering hole, scanning the trees. It was quiet. Then, behind him, a branch snapped. Eli turned slowly. Standing no more than 50 meters away was an elephant. It was large, clearly an adult, and stood half-hidden behind the trees. Its ears were out, but relaxed. Its eyes fixed on Eli, not with fear, but with intense, unblinking curiosity. Eli took a step forward. The elephant didn't move. He raised his hand slowly, palm open, and whispered, "Temba." The wind picked up. Leaves swirled at his feet. The elephant's ears twitched, and it took a tentative step forward. Eli didn't dare move. He pulled the flute from his pack and, with shaking hands, brought it to his lips. The first notes were shaky, but then the melody found him. It was the song he used to play under the baobab tree, the song Temba would listen to as he drifted to sleep. The elephant stopped. Its trunk lifted slightly. Then it took another step, and another, until it was only a few meters away. Eli could see its eyes now. Dark, deep, intelligent, and filled with something else. Recognition. The elephant extended its trunk, brushing it gently against Eli's shoulder, then his face. It lingered there, breathing softly. Eli lowered the flute. His voice cracked as he whispered again, "Temba, is it really you?" And then, the massive creature did something that broke every rule of nature, every line between wild and human. It wrapped its trunk gently around Eli's waist and pulled him close. Not in fear, not in defense, but in the unmistakable embrace of something remembered, something cherished. It was Temba. They stayed like that for a long time. No words, no sounds, just the soft breeze and the rustling of the trees as two souls, separated by years and distance, found each other again. When Eli returned to the ranger station later that evening, he didn't say much, only that he had found the elephant, and that the elephant had found him too. But over the next few weeks, something even more remarkable happened. Temba began to appear more often. Always alone, always near. He would wait near the old baobab tree in the mornings or appear near the river at dusk. Never too close to the village, never threatening. Just watching. Just remembering. Eli began to visit him regularly, sometimes bringing fruit, sometimes nothing but his flute. They didn't need much. Their bond had never been about things. It had always been about presence, about trust, about that silent language shared between two beings who had once saved each other. And then one morning, Eli woke to find Temba waiting just outside the station gate. It had never happened. The forest felt different that morning, dense, breathing, alive in ways Eli hadn't noticed before. Every leaf seemed to shimmer with memory. Every root and branch reached toward him like fingers pulling him into a forgotten past. And Temba, majestic and silent, led the way with the steady grace only elephants possess. They walked for hours. Temba never strayed too far ahead, always pausing to make sure Eli followed. There were no paths, no signs, just instinct. Eli trusted him completely. This wasn't a random journey. Temba was taking him somewhere with purpose. The sounds of the forest changed the deeper they went. The chatter of birds quieted. The buzz of insects softened. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Eli wiped sweat from his brow, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He felt the weight of something approaching, not danger, but revelation. Temba stopped at a clearing. It was wide, open, and filled with tall grass and wildflowers. At the center stood a single tree, an old, gnarled fig tree with thick roots that curled above the ground like resting serpents. Temba approached it slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the clearing. Eli stood still, watching. Then Temba did something extraordinary. He knelt. The giant beast folded his legs and settled onto the earth, just beneath the tree. His trunk stretched forward and tapped the soil gently. Then he turned his massive head toward Eli and let out a low, mournful rumble, a sound filled with sorrow and depth. Eli stepped forward. "Temba," he whispered. "What is this place?" Temba didn't answer in words, but he didn't need to. Eli approached the fig tree and saw something half hidden by moss and leaves, stones. Small, smooth, carefully placed. A pile, not random, but deliberate. A burial. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He knelt and cleared the moss with trembling hands. Beneath the stones, a piece of weathered cloth peeked through. Faded green, the kind Ngoma Rangers wore. And beside it, tucked into the roots, a rusted whistle, almost identical to the one Eli carried. He recognized it instantly. It had belonged to Kafumba. Memories flooded back, his father walking the same forest, patrolling, protecting. He had gone missing nearly a decade ago on one of his solo rounds. They searched for weeks but found no trace. Many believed he had been attacked by poachers or caught in a flash flood. But now, here he was. Here it was. His final resting place, lovingly guarded, remembered. Eli looked up at Temba. The elephant's eyes were wet. He rumbled again, softer this time, as if to say, "I was there." Eli's voice broke. "You stayed with him, didn't you?" And in his heart, he knew the answer. Kafumba must have been injured. Perhaps trapped, perhaps too weak to return. And Temba, wild and free, had found him. He had stayed. Maybe days. Maybe longer. Perhaps Kafumba's final comfort was not solitude, but the steady presence of the elephant he'd once saved. Tears streamed down Eli's cheeks. He sat beside the grave, placed his hand on the earth, and whispered, "Thank you, Baba. Thank you for everything. And thank you, Temba, for not letting him be alone." The forest held them in silence. A moment so sacred Eli could barely breathe. And then, Temba rose slowly, brushed his trunk across Eli's back, and turned toward the trees. The message was clear. It was time to return. They walked back together, neither in front nor behind, but side by side. Two souls bound by shared love, shared loss, and the quiet understanding that life was a circle far deeper than words could express. Over the weeks that followed, Eli found himself changed. He told the story to the elders at Ngoma, and they wept. He brought them to the grave, and together they rebuilt the site, cleaned it, honored it, placed a small stone plaque inscribed with Kafumba's name and the words, "Protector of Life, remembered by the wild." The forest seemed to breathe easier afterward. Temba continued to appear. Not every day, but often enough to become part of Eli's life again. Sometimes he brought other elephants. A small herd that kept a respectful distance, watching with gentle curiosity. Eli came to recognize them all. There was a young female with curved tusks who always stood beside Temba. Perhaps a sister. Perhaps a mate. And there were calves. Playful, shy, sticking close to their mothers. Eli smiled whenever he saw them. Temba had found his own family. He wasn't alone anymore. One day, while playing his flute by the riverbank, Eli noticed a familiar figure walking up the path. It was Professor Gondo, the elephant expert who had helped raise Temba years ago. He had grown older, slower, his beard now fully white. But his eyes lit up when he saw Eli. "I heard," the professor said, tears in his eyes. "The elephant came back." Eli nodded. "He did." The professor placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "That's rare, my boy. That kind of bond, it doesn't happen often. Elephants remember. But they don't always return." "He returned," Eli said quietly, "because he knew I never stopped waiting." They sat by the river, sharing stories, memories, and silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Temba appeared across the water, standing tall, his trunk swaying in rhythm with the wind. He didn't cross, but he watched. And Eli waved. The professor whispered, "He's watching over you now." Eli nodded. "He always has." Months passed. Then a year. Temba's visits became less frequent, but always meaningful. Once, he led Eli to an injured calf. Eli's legs moved faster than his thoughts, crashing through vines and branches, following the trail through the dense undergrowth. The fading trumpet he'd heard still echoed in his chest, more desperate than the wind, more urgent than the rising storm. His heart pounded as fear wrapped itself tighter with every step. Temba was hurt. The tracks were unmistakable now, massive impressions softened by smeared blood. Eli had seen such signs before during anti-poaching patrols. But never had they filled him with this kind of dread. Each drop of crimson against the forest floor felt like it drained from his own veins. He finally found him in a ravine, not far from the river bend where they used to play as boys. Where Temba once splashed like a calf, wide-eyed and clumsy, laughing with the sound only an elephant could make. But there was no laughter now. Temba stood half-collapsed against a rock wall, his right front leg dragging, a deep gash torn through his shoulder. His great body shivered with each breath, trunk curled beneath him like a wounded snake. Eli slowed, whispering his name. "Temba, it's me?" The elephant raised his head slightly. His eyes locked with Eli's. There was pain in them, yes, but also recognition. Trust. Relief. Eli dropped to his knees beside him, tears already spilling. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, though he knew the answer. The same men they had always fought against. The ones who left traps for ivory, bullets for beauty, snares for silence. Eli scanned the wound. It was a clean shot. Straight through muscle, maybe even grazing bone. The bleeding had slowed, but infection was setting in. The flies were already circling. He had to act fast. "I'll get help," he promised. "You just hold on. Just like you did for my father. Please, Temba. Wait for me." He sprinted back through the jungle, lungs burning, mind reeling. Every second mattered. Back at Ngoma, he burst into the ranger's outpost, startling the team mid-meal. "We've got an elephant down," Eli shouted. "It's Temba. He's been shot. Probably poachers. Still alive, but fading fast." The team leapt into action. Radios crackled. A medic was called. Supplies packed. The vet, Dr. Amara, who had treated wild animals for 2 decades, mounted the jeep beside Eli with practiced calm. "How bad?" she asked. "Worse than I've ever seen," Eli replied. "But he's still standing." "Then there's hope," she said. They reached the ravine just as rain began to fall. The storm had arrived. Thunder grumbling low like the growl of some ancient beast. Temba hadn't moved. But when Eli approached, his trunk rose weakly toward him. "He remembers," Eli said, voice thick with emotion. "He always remembers." The team set to work quickly. Dr. Amara injecting sedatives to calm him, then cleaning the wound with antiseptic that made even Temba's massive frame flinch. "He's lucky," she murmured. "Another inch and the bullet would have shattered the joint. It's deep but clean. We can save him if we keep infection at bay." Eli sat beside Temba's head the entire time, speaking softly, stroking the leathery skin behind his ear, just like he used to as a child. The rain soaked them both, but neither moved. By morning, the worst had passed. They set up a makeshift camp around the ravine. For 5 days, they took turns tending to him, feeding him soaked leaves, checking the wound, monitoring his strength. And every time Eli arrived, Temba seemed to stir a little more. On the 6th day, he stood without assistance. Cheers erupted across the camp. Dr. Amara cried quietly into her sleeve. "He's a miracle," she whispered. But Eli only smiled and said, "He's family." News spread quickly. The story of the wounded elephant who remembered his human and led him to a sacred grave found its way into newspapers and across the radio waves. People began calling them the Forest Brothers. Some called it myth. Others believed it was magic. But Eli knew it was something simpler: loyalty. Once Temba was strong enough to walk, they escorted him to a safer part of the forest, away from poaching zones. A protected valley monitored by rangers and camera traps, where the herd had already begun to gather. Temba's return was triumphant. The other elephants approached cautiously, touching trunks, circling, rumbling in deep, low tones. Eli watched from a distance, heart full. He didn't follow as Temba stepped back into the wild, into his place among his kind. But before disappearing, Temba turned one last time. Their eyes met. It was a goodbye, but not the final kind. It was the kind that said, "I'll come back when it matters." Weeks passed. Eli returned to his patrols, his flute, and his dreams. And in those dreams, he often saw Temba. Strong, healed, walking through moonlight. Then one afternoon, while checking camera traps with a young apprentice, they spotted fresh footprints. Huge ones. Eli smiled. "He's nearby." And sure enough, Temba appeared at the river the next morning. Clean, proud, and flanked by the young female with the curved tusks. By her side trotted a calf, still wobbly, still learning. Eli's breath caught. It was Temba's child. The circle had grown. He didn't approach this time. He simply watched from the trees, unseen, as Temba guided his little one to drink, then glanced in Eli's direction as if to say, "This is what we protect." Later that night, Eli wrote in his journal, "He came back to me not out of instinct, but love. He remembered my father, his grave, our childhood. He brought me back to where it all began. Not just to mourn, but to heal. And now, he returns not in pain, but in peace. I see him in the calf's eyes. I see him in the stillness of the forest. And I know he'll never truly leave." Later that night, Eli wrote in his journal, "He came back to me not out of instinct, but love. He remembered my father, his grave, our childhood. He brought me back to where it all began. Not just to mourn, but to heal. And now, he returns not in pain, but in peace. I see him in the calf's eyes. I see him in the stillness of the forest. And I know he'll never truly leave." Ngoma changed after that. More tourists came, yes. But more importantly, more rangers volunteered. More eyes watched the trees. Fewer poachers dared cross the line. Eli continued his work, older now, wiser. And every once in a while, when the night grew quiet and the stars blinked open like old memories, he heard a distant trumpet in the hills. Temba's voice. Calling home. The dry season had settled over Ngoma like a breath held too long. The rivers had thinned into silver ribbons. The trees stood bare, their leaves crisping at the edges. The wind carried dust and memory, and the people of the forest, those with fur, feathers, and silence in their bones, moved slower. Eli knew this rhythm. He had lived many seasons in Ngoma. His hair was touched with gray now, and his steps had softened. But his eyes still searched the trees the same way they did when he was a boy standing beneath the shadow of an elephant. He hadn't seen Temba in months. Not since that morning at the river, when the great bull had returned with his mate and calf. Not since their eyes had locked across the distance, each holding 1,000 unspoken things. He missed him. But he didn't worry. Temba had become part of the forest again. He belonged to the herd, to the valleys, to the whispers carried on jungle winds. Eli knew he would return when the time was right, when something mattered. That day came just after the first rains. The forest, hungry and dry for weeks, drank in the downpour greedily. Shoots of green sprouted overnight. Frogs sang again from the reeds. The air changed. Even Eli felt it. An invisible stir, as if something ancient had shifted beneath the earth. He was walking alone through the eastern trail, his rifle slung loose, his journal in his pocket, when he felt it. The silence. The birds had gone quiet. He turned, slowly. Then he saw them. Not one, not two, but the entire herd. 20 elephants moving together in a slow procession, like a living memory carved in motion. At the front was Temba. Taller now, heavier, but unmistakably him. His massive ears fanned like sails, his trunk swaying low. And beside him, the calf. Bigger now, stronger. But something was different. The elephants weren't just passing through. They were following a path. Deliberate, slow, and quiet. A kind of reverence hung around them, like the hush in a temple. Eli didn't move. He simply watched. Temba stopped a few feet away. His eyes met Eli's again. And then, without warning, the elephant knelt. Front legs folding slowly, painfully, until his massive head was nearly level with Eli's. The calf followed, and then the others. A herd of giants, kneeling in the forest. Eli fell to his knees, overwhelmed. He didn't need words. He knew what this was. This was remembrance. Not just of a man, not just of a grave, but of everything they had shared. This was Temba's way of honoring the bond that time had only deepened. He stepped forward, gently pressing his forehead to Temba's. "I remember too," he whispered. They stayed that way for what felt like hours, the jungle holding its breath. Then Temba rose and turned. He began to walk. And Eli, without thinking, followed. They led him through parts of the forest even he had never seen, ancient trails veiled in hanging vines, across rivers fed by mountain springs. Until they reached a clearing, wide and still, where sunlight poured like gold through the canopy. In the center stood a massive baobab tree, twisted and ageless. Temba stopped there. He brushed his trunk along the tree's bark, then stepped aside. Eli approached and saw something he hadn't expected beneath the tree. Nestled in its roots was a burial mound. Fresh. Carefully covered. Decorated with small stones and woven leaves. And beside it, the broken pieces of a poacher's rifle. Eli's breath caught. He dropped to his knees. Temba had buried one of his own. Not just buried, but honored. There was no body in sight. But the mound was too small for an elephant. A ranger. Eli scanned the ground and there, wedged in the bark, was a patch of khaki cloth. Torn from a uniform. His hands trembled. A young ranger named Kito had gone missing weeks ago during a patrol in the northern range. They had searched for him for days, found no trace. And now, here he was. Not abandoned. Not forgotten. Laid to rest by elephants. By Temba. The same elephant who had once buried Eli's father. The circle had come again. Eli wept, openly now. Not just for Kito, but for the sacredness of it all. For the way nature remembers even when humans forget. For the bond that could outlive decades. For the elephant who never forgot. Temba stood beside him the entire time. Later, when the sky turned orange and the first stars blinked open, Eli placed a wooden carving at the foot of the baobab. A carving he had made years ago, a small elephant and a man, standing side by side. He whispered a prayer. When he turned to leave, Temba followed him halfway, then stopped. They looked at each other one last time. Eli knew. This was the final visit. The kind of goodbye that wasn't born of pain, but of peace. He raised his hand. "Thank you," he said. "For remembering. For returning. For everything." Temba lifted his trunk and let out a soft, low trumpet that echoed through the forest like a heartbeat. Then he turned and disappeared into the trees, his calf trotting beside him, the herd following. Eli walked back to Ngoma alone. But not empty. He carried something deeper now, an understanding carved into his soul. Years passed. Eli became a storyteller. Children gathered around his fire to hear about the Forest Brothers. Tourists came not to gawk, but to learn. The forest was quieter now, safer, more sacred. And every now and then, someone would report seeing a massive bull elephant near the river, flanked by a young one, older now, stronger. They always asked if it was true. Was it really him? Eli would smile and say, "If you stand very still, and you listen hard enough, you'll hear him. He remembers. And he always will. Because some bonds never break. Some friendships are carved in more than time. They're carved in the soul. And when the forest speaks, it speaks in the sound of footsteps, of memories, and of the unshakable bond between a man and an elephant who never forgot." If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in the power of love and memory. And subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that celebrate the beauty of animals and the strength of human connection. Your support helps us tell stories that matter. Thank you for listening.